Welcome back, everyone, to episode 75 of the Minot Business Podcast presented by Bennett Media. I'm your host, Easton Bennett, and on the show today, we have Grant Johnson. Grant, it's fantastic to finally have you on the show.
Thanks, Easton. Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, there was a couple hiccups that we had to work through. I was sick last week. I had a family member pass away 2 weeks ago, so that's why things have been a little bit all over the place. But it's good to have you here. It's good to finally be back in front of the audience, which I'm sure you guys have been wondering, where are these episodes at?
They're ready.
But they're coming now. They're coming rest of the year, fingers crossed. Also have maybe a big announcement coming. Grant knows what I was talking about, but we're not going to tease it quite yet. But maybe there is a new announcement here in the coming weeks. But yeah, it's good to be back. Before we get started, if you have not already, please rate and review the show. Only takes 5 seconds to leave us a rating and review, and it really helps spread the word to new audiences and attract new guests for you guys each and every week, most times each and every week. But Grant, let's dive right into it. Just like we do for every show. For someone that's never met you, Grant, they don't know what you do, what you're all about. Give us your elevator pitch.
Sure. So my elevator pitch is I am a professional voiceover. And for anybody who's kind of wondering, okay, what is a voiceover? If you haven't been around since it started, voiceover is any recording of somebody talking over any kind of media, whether it's on the radio, whether it's on TV or some other kind of recording. That's when it's their kind of a disembodied voice. That's basically what you're listening to, is somebody doing a voiceover.
And he is a professional one. That's why his voice is going to sound a lot better on this podcast than mine is going to. We were joking before the show that whenever I do a commercial or something and there needs to be a voiceover, I always put in my scratch voiceover and it's just me like reading it. I don't even use these microphones. I literally I do it into my phone and plug it in and I'm like, man, this sounds really bad.
Modern phones, the microphones are a lot better than they used to be. So people can get away with not having to actually buy a microphone right away. They can hold off until they've started making some income off of voiceover before they, splurge for getting the better equipment.
And then once you get into the better equipment, become a professional voiceover artist. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Grant, give me a little bit about your background, first of all. So you've been doing the professional voiceover, but where did it start? Did you always, want to go into the business field? Did you start in a different field? Give me a little bit of your background.
Sure. So my background, I grew up around the area. My parents, they live on a farm out by Max Bass, if anybody knows where that's located.
Yeah.
But essentially my interest in voiceover started when I was really young. Anybody who's familiar with the movie Mrs. Doubtfire, the opening scene is Robin Williams in a recording studio doing his bit, and you've got the cartoon there, and you're doing the lip sync, and it's interesting that it was that was a dubbing session, because you don't hear the countdown, that there's they count you down, then there's with beeps.
Yep.
But they didn't do that in that movie. But I'm getting off topic. So I saw that movie, and being young and impressionable, I was interested in that. Also watched too many cartoons growing up and all of that sort of thing. So fast forward to high school, they kind of sit you down in a room with all your peers and they go, okay, time to start thinking about your future and
pick something now.
Yes. And that was kind of what I was like, oh, I want to do this. And the last 15 years since, I think, it'd be about maybe a little bit more than 15 years.
Okay.
I haven't done the math on it, but
we won't fact check you.
Yeah. Essentially, I took kind of a windy path to get back to wanting to do voiceover.
So I didn't realize that you were into voiceover so early. So it really did start from a young age.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned dubbing. For the people that don't know, what is dubbing? Yeah.
So there's two different kinds of voiceover when it comes to trying to audio sync. You've got dubbing, which you've already got the media created, and you're trying to get it so that if there's a character on the screen that you can see, you've got to match it so that your lips and what you're saying matches up with what they're saying. And I can't think of the name for the other version of a voiceover, but it's the kind where you record whatever it is you record, kind of like what they did with Aladdin for Robin Williams, the genie. They would just let him talk and talk and talk and talk. And then it's up to the animators to put something together to match what he did.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The one thing I always notice about if you watch a movie or a TV show or something is if they're shooting an over of a conversation of two people and you can't see one person's face, but they're talking, a lot of times the mouth doesn't match up because we're just looking at the reaction shot of the person.
Right.
And now that I pointed it out, everyone's going to look at that.
Yeah. They'll just see like this corner of the mouth and be like, the person's not even talking.
It's like, it's not even matched up at all. I pointed it out to my girlfriend and she's like, why would you tell me that? And I'm like, cause I have to see it every single time I watch a show.
And the other thing that people may not realize is that half of the time it's not even the actor that the shoulder you're looking over.
Yeah.
It's a stand-in.
Yeah. It's just a stand-in that has a similar looking cheek. And then,
or hairstyle.
We're really ruining movies and TV shows for everybody that's listening to the show right now. Yep. But next time you guys go watch and listen to a show or TV show, and right now I'm watching Suits, so I see it all the time. And I cannot, because everyone's focused on the reaction. So they don't even look at the other person. I'm looking at the other person like, that's driving me insane. So when you watch movies or TV shows, then I'm one of those guys that, since I'm a camera operator, I watch all the camera movements and how things are shot. Are you listening to the audio? Or not really?
Yes and no. So I'm not really one that kind of really analyzes a lot of the media when I'm listening to it, other than, is this so-and-so? I feel like this is so-and-so.
Okay. So you're more like, let's figure out who is actually
whose
doing
voice
the
it is. Yeah. And there's a lot of people that they've got kind of a similar voice. You've got Patrick Warburton, the one Joe from Family Guy, and
that's a pretty prominent
Warburton.
one. Yeah.
He does his similar voice print. You can recognize it in just about anything that he does, because he doesn't do a lot of really different. He doesn't differentiate his characters other than sort of the emotional side of it.
Yeah, and they're all pretty similar. I think it's crazy when people can do different voices, like Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane. He does a bunch. Is that who that is? Right? Yeah. Or Seth Rogen? No, Seth MacFarlane. Right?
Seth MacFarlane.
Yeah. Seth Rogen does a bunch too. And then who are the South Park guys?
Trey Parker and Matt Stone.
Yeah, they do a ton of them. And that's a question I had for you. You're a voiceover artist. I'm sure you have to do different emotions and feelings. How do you do that? Do you have to practice that, or what does it look like?
So that's really a really good tie into one of the best questions for people that, when they get interested in voiceover, one of the first things is, how do I get into it? Because people have told me either, I've got a great voice, or, this and that. And really the question or the answer that comes back from a lot of the professional voiceovers that have been in the industry for decades, like Bob Bergen, they always say, you need to focus on your acting first. It's acting first. And then, once you've got that down, then you can kind of start to look more into different ways that you can build out the character from there. If, let's say, you're not a Patrick Warburton, where you're going to use your natural speaking voice in all of your different roles, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the character specs and do kind of the analysis and say, okay, this is a bigger character. Maybe he's got a deeper voice. This is an older character, so maybe they don't have quite as much, it's more airy, it's more breathy.
Yeah.
Maybe they're a smoker. They've got kind of a gravelly sort of quality to it that, it's from decades of smoking and damage and all that kind of stuff. But those are things that you pick up after, one, consuming a lot of media, because, even real life, if you just listen to people in their everyday life, you can kind of pick up on some of those things.
Yeah. And so it does stem back to acting. One of the, I have another podcast with a couple of my buddies, and a lot of times they try to have me do accents and talk like certain or give me scenarios, and I'm so bad at it.
Yeah.
Like it's horrible. And that's what they laugh about. So is it just, do you have to practice it, or do you just have to consume it and then you kind of know, like, okay, this one's a little bit more airy, this one's a little bit more in the throat?
It kind of depends on somewhat the project and just how authentic you want things to be. I think right now, a lot of voiceover is going in sort of that authentic direction, where people really want the actor and the character to match up as much as it possibly can.
Okay.
So if there are certain, accents that you can do, typically they'll be looking to make sure that you sort of fit within that, either culture or ethnicity now.
Okay.
But,
so they wouldn't want like you doing, a Chinese person.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like the thing with Hank Azaria and Apu. Like
Yeah.
It's kind of frowned upon now. So it doesn't happen as much. But
and is that just recent, just because of,
I think because of the access
we're living in?
I think it's because of the access. More people are getting into it. More people can do it. And back then, it was to be kind of blunt, a lot of, white men.
Yeah.
Would
Was
do
it,
all
is
of
it
the
just,
voices,
just
so.
limited? Just not many?
I mean, and this is something that still kind of perpetuates, is that specifically for animation, if you want to be like a big name in animation, even within just like the voiceover community, because you've got different levels. You've got celebrity, which, anybody who's on film, if they want to be a voiceover, they can be. It doesn't always go the other way, but they're kind of tier one. So, if they want to be in a project or somebody wants to bring them into a project, they get it. Tier two is basically the established voiceover community in Los Angeles. So animation, it started
the big
out
hub.
Yeah.
LA?
So back in the day, there's only like 2 or 3 different production companies that were making cartoons. You had Hanna-Barbera and I don't remember the other one, but basically they used local talent because, that the technology at the time, that's what the restriction or the limitation on it was.
Okay.
So they needed to hire people that could make it to the studio. Well, if you have to be within driving distance of a certain studio that's located in, downtown LA, you're kind of limited. So that was kind of the situation back then. And then, just recently, last year at Imagicon, we had John Ratzenberger. Well, he had the same advice, but you kind of look at that and you go, okay, he's giving this advice because this is what worked for him. And
that's what we grew up with. That's how he did it. Yeah.
Yeah. And for animation, it honestly is still that way. They're still using those same, maybe not 1 or 2 studios to record everything, but they're still using the area. And like, that's where all of the casting directors are. That's where all of the current talent are. And something that's been mentioned on the podcast before, it's not what it's who you know.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to take a risk on somebody that they've worked with that they know can do it, even if it's not exactly going to match the voice that they're looking for. Yeah. If they know that they're going to be able to perform, which they can.
Yeah.
Versus getting somebody who's absolutely perfect for the role, but
they're new at it.
They're new. They haven't worked with them before. They're not living in the city, so they can't really vet them. They don't know. They're not connected to the same people. So a lot of different moving parts there.
What does that look like for someone like you then, where, let's say eventually you want to be on a Disney movie, right? And you want to do this big, like Frozen 5 or whatever they come out with, right? How would you get to that point? Do you just start with smaller films, just independent people where you're like, hey, I'll do the voice on that one? Or how do you get from point A to point B? Yeah.
So a lot of it is, again, going back to kind of the industry connections. You almost have to be training with the people who've done it. So, Bob Bergen, he's a guy, he does the voice of Porky Pig. He offers voiceover lessons, but, he's booked out years in advance. Yeah. So, but the lessons there, you try to work with the people that are doing the job, just to build those relationships. And then, ultimately, if it is something like animation, you basically have to move to California. It's kind of the short and skinny of that. If it was something like games is a different story because they're not localized all in California. So you could potentially do it remote. I know that I'm on X or Twitter. So
whatever you want to call it.
I'm connected with people that I know that, they're in, the UK or anywhere in the States that isn't necessarily where they're recording the stuff because some other projects that they're willing to utilize a lot of these home studios that have kind of been built now that, we went through the pandemic and people have more knowledge and experience working with it.
So you mentioned lessons. What do the lessons look like?
So I guess what I did was I reached out to initially a demo producer in California. Okay. And they said, well, have you taken lessons? And I'm like, well, I got a bachelor's degree, but it's been, and this is going back to, I took however long off. It'd be 8 years between when I finished my bachelor's in theater
Yeah.
And I reached out to this individual, Chuck Duran.
Okay.
And he said, okay, well, look into getting lessons. These are two coaches that I would highly recommend because, you know, they've either worked as a casting director or as a voiceover.
Yeah.
And I picked the one that was a voiceover, and
It's got to be, I don't think people realize the intricacies that go into a voiceover.
oh, sure.
Like there's no way people think, oh, you need to go take lessons for that.
right.
I assume, and maybe, you know, this is what I was assuming until I was doing a bunch of research before this, is that, you know, some people just have a certain voice.
Mhm.
And then when people need that certain voice, you get called. But there is a vast range of voices you can go through. Even your demo I was listening to before this, you know, you can go super corporate, you can go sentimental, you can go exciting, a product, whatever it is. There's so many different ways you can go.
And that's based off of the specs.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why everybody's demo is like that is because they want to show range.
Yeah.
Because you need to be able to show, oh, I fit in this category. Oh, but I can also do this and I can also do this. You want to show that you can do as many things as they're going to be looking for. And a lot of people, they have multiple demos, right? So they don't just have a commercial demo, which was kind of the gold standard up until recently.
Yeah.
Now that people can niche down and focus on just a certain topic of voiceover, they can have a specific demo for that. So they can have a narration demo. They can have
Here's my card demo.
interactive demo, which are that's games. You can have an animation demo. You can have a promo demo.
Mm-hmm.
You can have probably even like an IVR or a radio imaging demo.
Do you think everyone starts with that wide range and then, because there's obviously like, you know, Family Guy, Joe on Family Guy, that's kind of his voice. You're not going to see him doing some Disney character of some boy on Up or something. You know what I mean?
Right. But here's kind of the interesting thing is that all voiceover, I would say, if they're subsisting entirely off of voiceover work for their income, they're doing commercials.
Commercial is kind of the biggest thing.
Commercial is that's the meat and potatoes. If you have an 80-20 for voiceover, it's 80% commercial, 20% everything else for most people.
Yeah.
And then kind of the interesting thing going a step further is that when you think about voiceover, a lot of people think about getting an agent.
Yeah.
And when it comes to how much income you get being a voiceover, you get about 20% of your work from an agent and about 80% on your own.
Really?
So
okay.
Again,
what is the breakdown for paying an agent then? They obviously get a cut if they bring in work.
Yep. So one thing that you want to kind of be aware of as a voiceover is that if you're compensating your agency, which you should, you should work for an agency that, you know, they need something in order to have an incentive to send you work.
Yeah.
Make sure that they're only getting one source of income from you. So there are basically three kind of primary ones. You can either pay for access, which this is kind of the online casting pay to play sites. They do this. So you pay a fee, a subscription fee, you get access to these auditions.
Okay.
You can pay them a commission or a management fee or whatever you want to call it. That ranges based on whether you have like a manager or if you have an actual agent. Managers, they do more for you, so they get a bigger cut. But I think somewhere between 10 and 20% is kind of standard.
Okay.
And then charging the client on top of your service. So let's say you're going to get paid $500 for a job.
Yep.
You could always have it grossed up so that you charge the client, you know, $600 and then you keep the $100, give the $5 to the talent.
Okay.
Try and find somebody that only does one of those three things. You don't want to have somebody doing all three.
Yeah, that'd be bad if they're like, hey, you have to pay us a monthly subscription and then we're going to take 10% and you have to build it into the price. That'd be a nightmare. So talking a little bit, I want to go back to the business side of things then. Did you always know like, hey, I want to start a business as voiceover, or did you just, you know, as a hobby, or when did you get to that point where you're like, okay, let's go into this? Because I know, you know, kind of what I'm transitioning to. You went through the Startup Minot program, correct? And I want to talk about that a little bit, but what was that leap of faith where you're like, you know what, let's run with this. Let's try to make this into something.
So this isn't my first foray into business. The first example that I have of being involved in sort of the entrepreneurial spirit was my dad. He's run the family farm out there in the Max Bass area for We passed 100 years, but I don't know exactly what number we're on now. But that's kind of the first thing, because he's been self-employed ever since the late 90s.
Okay.
So he took over from my grandpa, and you know, being a farmer, a lot of farmers, you know, in North Dakota, and just knowing that, oh, this is kind of a typical thing, is people working for themselves, setting their own hours, which really farmers don't get to set their own hours, but we'll kind of gloss over that.
Yeah.
And so I'd been exposed to that early on. Then after college, I worked, you know, for a bank for a few years, or a credit union rather. And then I finished my master's, and I went, well, I kind of want to do something maybe a little bit different. So then I looked into working in insurance. Okay. So that was my first real foray into, okay, this is what it's like to be more or less self-employed.
Yeah.
And it was a very eye-opening experience.
How so?
I am not somebody who's very good at the cold outreach.
Yeah. It is one of the hardest parts of business, I think.
Yeah.
And it's probably one of the biggest too.
Absolutely. It was the biggest. Like I'm not, as you can tell, still doing insurance. And part of the reason is because I got in my head a lot about sort of I'm bothering people instead of being like, I can help these people. And I think mentality or mindset, they're really important when it comes to being a salesperson or one of those kinds of outbound people for a business, because if you're not in the right mindset, you're not going to do well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people say sales is the lifeblood of a business. If you don't have sales, you have nothing, right? Yep. You could be the best voiceover artist in the world. I could be the best video cameraman in the world, right? But if you can't sell the project, you know,
if nobody knows about you, and if you can't sell people on your value, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And you can't tell people how much you care if you don't talk to them.
So what's your mindset now? Is it shifted into more so I can help these people, or are you still battling with that?
Yeah, I know there's time still for me. There's a struggle. It's an everyday struggle.
A lot of times I reach out to people and I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope they don't get mad that I'm texting them or emailing them or calling them.
Yeah. I think at some point I just need to make a list for me to read in the morning and just go, okay, remember this.
Yep.
Keep your head here. If you need to reframe, take a break, grab a drink and then come back at it.
There's one thing that I always saw that if you just break it down into numbers. So let's say, your average project that you have is $1,000 and you have to decide how many people do I have to reach out to get one of those jobs. So maybe you reach out to 100 people, maybe 10 of them answer, and then maybe one actually buys from you. So it's, every time I reach out to 100 people, I'm making $1,000. So if you divide that out, it's what,
$10 or
$10 or something. Every time you reach out, I make $10, right? So if I reach out to this person, even if they say no, it's worth $10. So having that mindset, which I don't always have it, but whenever I'm in that mood of okay, let's reach out to some people, let's make some connections. I just have to tell myself, even if this person tells me to go kick rocks, I just made $25 talking to them, whatever it is.
And that's another thing too, is sort of this idea that while I was working in insurance, it was start off, you want a yes, obviously. If you don't get a yes, you want to know. Yeah. Because then you're not spending a lot of extra time and effort trying to, get blood out of a turnip.
Yeah, I like that. But yeah, it is. Because then it's they don't answer. So you follow up 2 days later and then they give you some half-hearted answer. And then you send an email. It's like, okay, now it's 7 weeks in and it's going to turn into nothing. So that is, I want to keep talking about this a little bit more. But before we do that, we're going to hear from this week's sponsor, Midco. Is your business moving up and to the right? Put Midco's business technology to work for you so you never have a slow day at the office. From premium internet and phone plans to custom private networking and advertising, they have a solution for every type of business, large or small. Get paired with an account representative to create your suite of services and make the switch with ease with dedicated business client fulfillment and support teams. No data caps, flexible contracts with month-to-month or long-term options, built-in DDoS protection, and more. Explore services and request a free consultation at midco.com/business today. All right, Grant, let's get back into the questions here. So we mentioned Startup Minot right before that. What was your experience like there? And maybe for the people that don't know what Startup Minot is, give us a quick spark notes of the program and then tell us what your experience was.
Sure. So sort of the premise is that we've got kind of a cohort of business owners or people looking to become business owners who get together. It's sponsored by Minot EDC and Cirrus Basin. And we've got people from both entities who come in. They'll bring in a local business owner to kind of talk about running their business, things that they encountered along the way, and basically let them sort of pick their brain, figure out, what works, what doesn't work, what they should be thinking about, since a lot of people who have never tried going into business for themselves before, they might have, a question about, taxes because they've never had to do payroll or, those kinds of things. And that comes up, and I don't remember how many weeks. I think it was 10 or 12 weeks of meeting for about, I think, 3 hours a day.
Yeah. And
we would talk about all that kind of stuff. And the goal is to get everybody to a point where they understand sort of the business side of it, of, okay, yeah, we need to be thinking about pricing so that we know how much we need to make, and we need to know how we're going to get that, and really just come up with a plan. And that was the goal of the last couple of weeks, was just putting together that plan and figuring out, okay, I need to do this. I should be focusing on this.
Yeah.
And then use that to kind of build out your next roughly 3 months.
So what was it like? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah. Yeah. It was a great time. It helps that, I knew some of the people before it, and even the people that I didn't know beforehand, they're nice people, people that, you can kind of tell, oh, they're from the area, or at least have kind of immersed themselves after, coming here. So
yeah,
it's a good group of people.
So going into it, what were you kind of thinking it was going to be like? Did you learn anything throughout is it a program, I guess, experience, whatever you want to call it, but did you learn anything? You're like, man, I didn't really think we were going to get into this.
Yeah. A lot of it was kind of repeat for me, in a sense that, because I did the insurance thing, I went through a lot of the sort of budgeting aspect of it, and understanding, okay, again, kind of the action, like I need to be doing this many phone calls technically. And if I'm not, then, there's going to be issues. But there were a couple of other things that maybe that didn't cover, but I think a lot of that's because of, just sort of the changing landscape of being a business owner. Is now you also have things like social media to kind of factor into sort of the self-promotion, marketing and branding side of things that I think we did talk at least a fair amount about.
Yeah. So when you left it then after the 10 or 12 weeks, whatever it was, what was your emotional state? Were you excited? Were you pumped? Were you nervous? What was that like?
Yeah. I was excited. The problem is that for me, it's really hard holding myself accountable. Like I'm good at holding myself accountable to others, but holding myself accountable to myself is kind of another story. So one thing that I've implemented since then, I've got an accountability partner he's out in California that we've fallen off the wagon here the last couple of weeks, kind of the same story with scheduling the podcast. But the goal is to get back in touch with him and get back to a point where we've got these things that we're, looking to make sure that, keeping the main thing, working on what we can when we have time, and making sure that, if this is something that both of us are looking at doing in the long run, we can't let it kind of fall on the back burner for too long.
It is powerful to have that person or, a couple people to be able to hold you accountable. I know I have one friend that lives in Canada. We do weekly masterminds where we go through what's going on in our business, ask any questions, problem solve, whatever it might be. And then at the end of each one of those meetings, we come up with a list like, hey, here's the stuff that you have to do before next week's meeting. And then when you don't, you're allowed to go at that person. You can say, what the hell are you doing? Why didn't you do this? You said you were going to do it. You didn't do it. And it does help being accountable to somebody else if they know that you also have these tasks. But when it does come to yourself, it is a little difficult.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't need to do it. And then you battle with yourself.
Right. Well, and also this isn't something that I think ties into it too terribly much, but I feel like I also might benefit from some Adderall or something like that.
Yeah, there you go. You just got to take one of those and then you are locked in for the rest of the day.
But I need to see somebody about it first to make sure that that's actually something that might help.
If anybody listening has a connection to that, Grant could use your help. Speaking of connections, what do you think? I'm sure you made a lot of connections at Startup Minot. You have these connections in California, accountability partners. What do you think the power of having connections is in business?
Oh, it's vastly important. The idiom is no man is an island. Well, there's a reason for that. And, it takes a village.
Yeah.
all of these things, we might kind of laugh about the fact, people say them all the time, but there's a grain of truth there because, when you think about it, really, there's so many different relationships you have with people. And I think that ties in really well with storytelling is, you're looking at all of these different scenarios and people in different relationships and different dynamics and different emotional states brought on by the fact that, this person isn't doing what I want them to, or they're not letting me do what I want to do. And all of these kind of things. So,
yeah. And then it is funny, the sayings where they're very cliche. You hear a lot of them in business all the time. And it turns out, after I've been doing this for 5-ish years now, all of them are true. Nobody's ever lying.
Right.
It's who you know, not lying about that. Networking is important, not lying about that. So it is kind of funny how they all come true.
Yeah.
One thing we were talking about earlier, the talent agency. We kind of went in a different direction, which is okay, but I wanted to come back to that.
Sure.
How do you go about finding a talent agency? What does that look like? Were there specific things you were looking for?
Yeah. So I was fortunate in the sense that after I had my demo put together, my voice coach was able to give me a list of contacts and said, here you go. Look into what their requirements are because, it's not just have my, get out of jail free card. It's you still have to do your work.
Yeah.
So, if you have the contact information, and even if you don't have the contact information, using Google, you can kind of look up, talent agency, this area. So usually it's going to be either California, New York, or you can do one that's bi-coastal, which is they're California and New York.
Okay.
Chicago, some are in Texas, some are even in Minnesota. But basically, wherever you want to search for representation, you would just type that in. Look for them, look at their website. Most of them will have a representation form.
And does that give you mostly jobs in that area then, or is it?
So that'll tell you where the agencies are located.
Okay.
And then on their website, they'll say, okay, these are the talent that we currently represent. And then it'll give you a link to their demos.
Okay.
And then on the representation tab of their website, they'll have either a form you can fill out or instructions on what you need to submit and who to send it to.
Yeah. So what was that process like for you? Did you go through a lot? Was it a process to kind of try to find the one you wanted?
Yeah. So interesting enough, when I finished my demo, I started to build out my sort of X profile or
formerly known as Twitter.
Twitter. I started to spend more time there looking for stuff because I kind of found out that that's a pretty good place to look for stuff for like open casting calls. That's people will post them there pretty frequently. And there was a talent agency on there that was like, hey, we're just now opening up. We'll take submissions. And I submitted to them along with some of the ones that were on the list. And they actually said, yeah, let's work together. So.
Well, it's kind of cool and there's a mutual benefit. If you're both like, hey, you look like you're a fit for me, they say the same thing in return rather than, hey, here's my form. And they're like, okay, we'll take you.
Well, and that's, I think also kind of the benefit there with the timing was that all of these other ones, because they're established, they're already representing talent and they are going to put them first. And we kind of talked about, people can kind of change their voice to a degree, but there's enough people that if you have a similar enough sound to your voice compared to the people that they have on the roster already, a lot of the talent agencies will just ignore your submission because they'll be like, why do I need two of them? Yeah. We're going to feed all the work to the one that we already have on the books because one, again, that thing about it's an established relationship. we already trust them. We already know the level of work that they can put in and that they're, qualified because they've got their demos done and they've probably booked work before. So
yeah, that makes sense. So it's probably difficult to get into some of them. But when you do find that fit, that's what's awesome. Yeah. So you got the agency side. I personally get emails all the time from voiceover people, and they're like, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. Here's my reel. Here's a little bit about me." Yep. So you have the agency side, which is pushing you some work. What are you doing on the external side? I know you've talked about some outreach. What does that marketing look like for a voiceover professional?
Yeah. So it looks like anything from, doing basically any kind of outreach that you would do in any other kind of business you can do for being a voiceover. Okay. I know that Alex Hormozy, somebody that we're both interested in his content. He talks about kind of the 4 main pillars. So you've got one-on-one cold, one-on-one warm, one-to-many cold, and one-to-many warm. Yeah. So I like the content side of it because it's a way to reach a broader market, again, because I'm not as great on the one-on-one stuff. I enjoy making content. The problem is I have sort of that decision fatigue where like, I don't know what I should do because I come up with too many ideas. Yeah. So I need to get better at actually making a choice and then sticking with it and then following it through and saying, okay, did this work or did it not? I'm at that point right now with my YouTube channel because I made some shorts and YouTube was like, hey, it's New Year's. People are, trying to, waste time while they're, with friends or family. So let's push this to all of them. But then it took a nosedive after that because it's very repetitive in terms of like, I didn't hardly changed up the visuals. Yeah. And very short, like YouTube gets mad at you if you have too short of content. Like even for shorts, like it was like 9 to 15 seconds. It's like, no. People are like, we're not doing this. The average view duration is too short. So it needs to be at least like 30 seconds. Okay. For it to be like, oh, let's push this to even more people.
I didn't know that. That's a good little tidbit that hopefully our listeners can take away from that. I'm going to take away from that. Yeah. So content wise then, you're posting some YouTube shorts. What did the content look like?
Yeah. Jokes. Yeah. Just dad jokes.
I like it.
But one thing that I've kind of tooled around with the idea of is public domain content, because you don't have to worry about copyright issues. It's a good source for material. And, recently just in January, Steamboat Willie entered that area. So
really,
yeah, but that specific version of Mickey Mouse. So it'll be a while before, the rest of the stuff kind of follows suit. But, if, you were really big into Mickey Mouse, you can at least use that visual to be like, oh, I'm going to make some of my own stuff. But, using maybe some public domain stuff, reading like Sherlock Holmes maybe, or something like that, that would be an option. Another thing is that I know that there's some libraries of material for people to access and utilize for like doing samples. So I was thinking about doing some stuff with that, possibly even, doing kind of a Mr. Beast inspired take on that, where it's like, oh, reading the same script, but trying to do 100 like different versions of that and seeing like, okay, how different can I actually make this sound over 100 different reads?
Cause that's where, I was thinking about that before we started recording, is creating content for most businesses. You can kind of figure out a way. It's like, okay, we sell apples, right? We can make content around selling apples. How do you sell a voice? Right. And I think I've ran into one person on TikTok, and it's more so impressions where he'll talk like Trump, and then he'll talk like Seth Rogen, and then he'll talk like Biden. Right. And he's kind of going through these, but it's got to be hard to sell a voice. Right.
Well, and especially with sort of that side of it, because going back to the question earlier about, okay, how do I get into voiceover? People are like, oh, you need to focus on the acting first, because a lot of people, and myself included, the first thing that we jump to is, oh, I can do an impression of so-and-so. Yeah. Well, they already have an actor who's voicing so-and-so. So if you want to wait around for that person to croak, or for them to decide, oh, we're going to take this project in a different direction and we're not going to even offer it to them anymore. Yeah. You don't want to wait until that point to start making, work. You want to be doing stuff before that. And that's where some of these other things that I've kind of been looking into have been kind of a nice creative outlet to both be working on something and also be kind of developing those skills at the same time.
I didn't think about that because if you're like, yeah, I do a mean Bart Simpson, right?
Yeah,
Well,
Nancy Cartwright, she might have words with you.
yeah, then it's like, okay, well, I got to wait till that person dies. Otherwise, I'll never be Bart Simpson.
Yeah, and like the one kind of outlier in that scenario is Bob Bergen. So
Okay.
I kind of mentioned him again, Porky Pig. Mel Blanc, he was the voice of pretty much all of the Looney Tunes characters, more or less. And then here comes Bob. He's 14 years old. He calls up Mel Blanc out of the blue, and he's
Really?
like, "Oh, what do I need to do to get into voiceover?" And he's like, and he actually, Mel Blanc gave him, "Oh, well, what voices can you do?" So the advice has completely changed from what voices can you do to, yeah, you need to be an actor first.
Yeah.
But so he knew ever since he was 14 that he wanted to be Porky Pig.
Yeah.
And, eventually he spends enough time around people doing voiceover and all of that he gets his training. And then I think he actually got an agent about 18 years old. And then
Okay.
he's in his, I think, 60s now.
Yeah.
And he's obviously been doing very well in voiceover, and he was, Porky Pig in Space Jam. So he got his, but he's, again, going back to that, he's the outlier. Not
I was going to
everybody's
say
going.
that's different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's a very edge scenario. And it's not a bad thing to do impressions. It's not a bad thing to try them out, because there's a lot of people that have made it work. Brizzy Voices, or Anna Brisbane.
Mhm.
She did like all of the original Pokemon. And she kind of blew up after that. And now she does voiceover.
Yeah.
Frank Caliendo, he does impressions. You've got, Jim Meskimen. He does
Okay.
impressions. James Arnold Taylor, he's a voiceover who does really well. And he's well known for doing impressions.
So there is a way to do it. And
Yeah.
and that's one thing you have to think about all the time, is that there is a way to do something, whichever way you want to go, but is it going to be the easiest? Are you creating more problems for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you can't do it. If I was a cameraman, it's like, I shoot everything one-handed.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you can probably make that work, but why would you?
Right. And going back to kind of the topic we had with Patrick Warburton, people hire him because of his natural speaking voice.
Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter that you can do impressions if you can do one voice really well. And I think that's kind of the niching down that, like, a lot of businesses can be like, okay, well, this is my avatar. Well, if, let's say, for instance, I was really like, okay, I'm going to be really into doing commercials, and I have, again, kind of these different styles, but I can focus on sounding like this whenever I'm doing those ad reads or commercials. That might be the way that I'm able to fully flesh out my career.
Are you pro niching down then, or you think it's good to have a wide range?
I think it's good to try everything.
Yeah.
And then if you notice that one really speaks to you a lot more than the rest, that might be kind of the way to go, which, there's enough different categories of voiceover that people can do that. But kind of going back to, well, you're missing a lot of the opportunity if you're going to say, oh, I'm not going to even consider doing commercials.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of if anybody's doing voiceover, you kind of want to at least keep that in your wheelhouse so that you can
Immediately giving yourself a crutch.
Yeah.
If you're like, no corporate, no commercials, no nothing. You're like, oh, okay, this can be a little bit harder for you.
Yeah.
So
You're going to be spending a lot of time at conventions signing autographs.
yeah, exactly. So I know you mentioned to me before game jam. I can't remember if you mentioned on the show. What does that mean? So it's video games, right?
Yep.
So what is, because I don't play video games anymore. I just don't have time. But I played all kinds of video games growing up.
Yeah.
Call of Duties, Fortnites, Minecraft, everything. What is that like?
Yeah.
Doing
So
the video games.
a game jam, this is kind of a more recent thing. I would say probably in the last 10 years or so. People, they want to build out sort of that, spec ad kind of thing, like what, you might put together for their portfolios.
Yeah.
And that was a way for people who want to get into making video games can do that. So a game jam, it's going to be over a certain period of time. Could be a week or a day, if you're like really intense. the one that I just finished working on, we got a month to work on it.
Okay.
And you go from concept to plan to implementation to basically post-production kind of bug testing, all of that stuff. And then at the deadline, or hopefully before the deadline, you get a build submitted onto whatever page, or whatever kind of like submission requirements they have for the project. And then at the end, hopefully it kind of varies. You might have something that it's just like people are just doing these ones for fun. And again, to kind of make something for their portfolio that they can point to and say, hey, look, I did this. Other people might be intentionally doing it because they realize that, oh, if I get first place, I'm going to get this, this, and this.
Yeah. So as a game jam, it's like a spec piece, like a portfolio piece. So then they submit it, and then can people be like, okay, let's actually turn this into a real video game? Is that how it kind of works?
It has happened in the past where people have worked together on a game jam, and then it's turned into a fully fleshed out video game, partially because of the different either publicity or the things that they'll give away as prizes.
Yeah.
Because one of the ones that I did this year, they actually said, we'll pay all of the fees to get this thing put on Steam.
Okay.
So
that's pretty sweet.
Yeah. And that's one of the online, digital video game stores that people can go and buy video games from. So that's kind of cool. One story that I know of that it started out as a game jam and it turned into a video game, I'm pretty sure was Inscription. That's a more recent game, but it's like a card game that like the goal is you sacrifice cards to make other cards more powerful.
Okay.
And like I can't remember it.
So is the voiceover for that then like a narration, or is there characters? Because
I think there's characters.
There's gotta be two. You can do like a Skyrim character where there's some audio, or there can be something like a Quiplash. If you ever played Quiplash, where there's a narrator and kind of explains the rules.
Yeah.
So it can kind of go both.
Basically, depending on what the project calls for and what kind of a setting it's in, that's going to dictate what kind of characters might show up and what kind of narration they might have. Like, think about any kind of video game that you've had. If you've played a video game and it's one of these like MMORPGs and they've got all of these different like kind of anime characters, you're going to see a lot of people that they'll be voicing the characters and they'll sound a lot like the characters in anime because the two mediums, they kind of match up really well. So, versus something like you said, Quiplash, it sounds more like a narrator. Well, it's because he's reading the same words that are appearing on your screen. So like, it's going to sound a lot like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But also kind of, whatever DJs or other people that do that kind of work, or people that do live events. Yeah. It's a more of a personality. So you want to have kind of heightened language where they're keeping people engaged.
It's fascinating how many different avenues there are for it. Because you could go audiobooks, you could do corporate work, you could do movies, you could do TV shows, games, everything. There's a ton of different avenues. What's your, if you had a perfect future, if you had to look, 20 years down the road, what does that look like? What do you want to be doing?
Yeah. The things that I kind of fill up my bucket are animation and video games. They're the things that when I was little, I was really into doing those things, like playing them or consuming the media. So I would love to get into those. And, everybody wants to be in a AAA game and wants to be on a, Pixar or Disney kind of movie. But with, again, kind of my understanding of at least the current market, I'm more geared towards games than I would be animation just for that reason.
Yeah.
Because it feels like that sector is going to be a little bit more open, but I do feel like I'm going to be like the, 10 or 20% of voiceovers that can do this professionally. I'm going to have to really, get into doing commercial work to.
Yeah. And then, you do the commercial work to fund the fun stuff. And then eventually you're doing that full time. What would be a dream project or a dream character? Maybe, your favorite, what would you want to do if you're like, hey, you get to pick one thing.
Right. So again, like everybody, I've worked on different impressions. The Muppets were kind of a big thing for me growing up. So I've worked on my voice so that I can make it sound like Kermit the Frog or Back to Teeth, the different Muppets. But it'd be fun to work in a project like that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the other ones that I can sound like. A lot of stuff that I watched a lot of Cartoon Network, so a lot of stuff from there. I think William Street, they do a lot of like the Adult Swim stuff that's not anime. Okay. So I feel like it'd be fun to work for them.
That'd be cool. Voiceover is so fascinating to me. It's so, and just like I was saying earlier, there's so many different avenues you can go down. So
and then really that's kind of going back to the thing. I won't touch on that. We'll touch on that later because I know what's coming up.
Well, I only had one more question for you. What did you want to touch on?
Oh, no. The one after that.
Yeah, that's the question I'm giving you right there.
Okay.
The Mount Rushmore business advice that we're getting to?
Yes.
That's the last question I got for you here, Grant. And guys, people are starting to learn on the show. If you guys are listeners of the show, Grant's got a paper here because he knew this question was coming. And people are starting to learn. And I honestly like that. It's almost like a little inside joke now with the guests. So what would be your Mount Rushmore of business advice? You got to have 4 pieces. What would they be?
All right. So I touched on this one a little bit earlier, but try everything and then you can decide or iterate from there. Basically, you just be an open book or a sponge, absorb what you can, try everything out. Don't be prude. Be like, yeah. And, you might find something that you didn't expect you were going to enjoy. And, are you better for trying something that doesn't pan out? Probably, because, you have, these people like Thomas Edison tried to make a light bulb 10,000 times and he found 10,000 ways to not make a light bulb. So
dude, I do like that quote. You can't lose unless you quit. That's something I always tell myself. It might take 20 years, but we'll get there.
Okay. Number two, feel the fear and do it anyway.
Oh, I like that.
Yep. It's never going to be the right moment. So you might as well get started now before you're ready so that you can learn how to do it and overcome it when times get tough. And then kind of in line with that is this thing that I learned doing insurance, which is eat the frog.
Yeah.
Start with the hardest thing first, and then you can lean into that. And then after that, everything's downhill. So
eat to get that gross, disgusting frog out of the way in the beginning. That's something I do whenever I'm working. And if, let's say it's a project and I got to edit it and I know it's a big undertaking, I'm doing it first thing in the morning. I'm going to edit for 4 hours straight. I'll do all that menial tasks in the afternoon.
Yeah. It's hard for me because the stuff that I don't like about voiceover is the editing. Yeah. But I have to record in order to edit. So I have to work through to get to the thing I don't like. But,
to get to the frog.
Yeah. Number 3, we've got the rule of 100 or I'm kind of combining 2 different ideas here is the 10X rule.
Okay.
So there's 2 different rules of 100.
Okay.
There's the rule of 100, which is if you can do something for 100 hours a year, it's going to put you in the top 5% of the population, the whole world basically in that area.
Really?
That's
I suppose, yeah.
Statistic from Jesse Itzler. You can fact check it later, but, and then the Alex Hormozy version of the rule of 100, if you do 100 primary actions or whatever, over a span of 100 days, it's unlikely that you'll be unsuccessful. Fail.
Yeah. I like that.
And then the 10X rule, which is just you need to think in scales of magnitude higher than the amount of action that you think is going to take to do whatever it is that you want to achieve.
So I think I heard this one time with Cody Wanner, I think is how you pronounce his last name. And he said, one of his goals for the year was that he wanted to buy a house. Mm-hmm. So really he changed his goal to, I need to buy 10 houses this year.
Yeah. And so then sometimes it's as simple as just adding a 0 onto the thing, but also thinking about like, you can't lift, 10,000 pounds. So how can you improve, your physical capacity in a way that's 10 times more intense or 10 times as purposeful?
Yeah. And I did that with one of my goals this year was YouTube subscribers, which I've been very lackadaisical on my personal YouTube channel. But, I was sitting down and I was like, oh, it'd be cool to get to like 10,000 YouTube subscribers. It's like, well, why don't you try to get to 100,000? Because your actions towards getting to 100,000 are going to be way different than your actions to getting to 10.
And you'll think in a completely different way too. Like if you put a ceiling on it and you say, okay, I need to get to, $5,000 or $10,000 a month in income. Yeah. I'm going to be safe.
Yeah.
Well, if you think, okay, what would I need to do in order to do 10 times that? You're thinking, okay, I'd have to hire this person. I'd have to make sure that we're not even thinking about this other thing that is taking up all of our time and resources, and it's not gaining us anything.
And even if you don't get to, let's say, I want to get to $10,000 a month, try to get to $50,000 a month, because even if you don't get to 50, you might get to 17.
Yeah.
You might get to 23, which is more than 10.
Yeah.
More than 10. I do like that one. That's probably one of my favorites we've had on the show so far.
Yeah. And then the last one is success leaves clues.
Oh.
Look at what other successful people have done in the past and use them as your role model. So this is kind of tying in with that Bob Bergen idea of find the people that are doing the thing that you want to do, and then model your activity and your actions off of what's worked for them in the past.
Yeah. I like that.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't reinvent the wheel, because just figure out. And that's something, I've went through a couple courses, and all the courses I buy, that person has done what I've trying to do. It's a video person that's a little bit higher than me. They've made better videos. So I'm like, I know I can learn from that person.
Do you watch Hayden Hillier-Smith?
I don't.
It was he used to be Mr. Beast's editor.
Oh, really?
So,
yes, I do actually. I didn't know that was his name. Does he have blonde hair, skinnier guy?
He's got glasses. He might have blonde hair. I don't know, but
I feel like I saw him on Twitter.
We can
X.
take a look.
Yeah. Huh. I didn't know that was him, or I didn't know that was his name. I guess I knew now.
It's one of them. I know that Mr. Beast has had a dozen probably.
Yeah.
And
talk about the guy that knows how to do content.
Yeah.
Mr. Beast. All right, Grant, where can people find you?
I have Facebook, Twitter or X, YouTube. They're all under Grant Johnson VO, or I guess on Facebook it's Grant Ira Johnson voiceover. I have my own website, grantjohnsonvo.com. And just check out those places, see what I've got going on, and love to connect with everybody.
Grant, thank you very much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I'm glad we finally got it. It's been a couple weeks, but a fantastic conversation. I think it was over an hour here, and it just flew by. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
That was episode 75 of the Minot Business Podcast. Again, guys, sorry for the delay in episodes here the past couple weeks, but we're going to keep cranking these episodes out. Also, I will shout out a little plug. Maybe should have done this at the beginning of the episode, but if you go to, I don't even know the website link, bennettcreativemedia.com/the Minot Business Podcast, you can submit any names or submit yourself for the podcast, and we'll get your form sent right to us. I just double checked on my computer, bennettcreativemedia.com/the Minot Business Podcast. You can go on there and throw your name on there. So send it to a friend or recommend your friend. Do whatever you want. So again, Grant, thanks for coming on. That is episode 75. We will see you guys next week for episode 76.